I want to talk about perfectionism. I feel like I talk about it a lot. And yet again, as we both were chatting about before we started recording, we both speak to so many women entrepreneurs, and we still see that as a common theme about when they want to launch a product, making sure that it's perfect and everything is laid out. And honestly, that just delays the launch. So I know you're very passionate about this topic as well. So tell me more about your advice if someone's struggling to get that launch out there and is really paralyzed by this perfectionism. What would you tell this person?
Yeah, such a great question. And I definitely feel that a lot of women or a lot of people in general are scared of launching that first product. And I would just say the most important thing I learned is that the product that you have and the product that really is, crushing it tends not to be the product that you launch with. And just be okay with that. I would say approach it like everything's a learning process. We initially launched Wild Wonder in a glass bottle and we converted to cans, and we've iterated the packaging so many times that you can probably find barely any resemblance between our iteration number one and what it is today. So the best thing you can do for yourself is to get as much feedback as possible in as short period of time as possible so you can just learn fast and save time and save money and just continue to iterate. Incremental change really makes a huge impact over time. And I would say just treat it as a learning experience. Don't even think about, there is no perfect product, so don't even try.
Yeah. I think there was a typo on one of our bags for like a good year and a half on the back. And I realized it later. I was like, what? We looked at the print millions of times and we even missed it. But it's just, doing hundreds of these interviews, you're right. You are so many women, make mistakes. You're always iterating. And also sometimes you don't even know how to pivot until it's out there. Like you think you know every scenario, but you don't. Like you need to have people buying the product, touching it, feeling it. So I
Totally.
agree with you. Like don't spend so much time and money to get that perfect product out because everyone is always shifting and changing once it's out there in the world. And
100%.
you still are, like you
100%.
said, even to this day. So I love that. So I want to talk a little bit about your upbringing. I know you grew up with your grandmother in Beijing and then moved to the US at the age of 12. I can't even imagine. That must have been such a big transition. And I'm curious, how have those early days really impacted you as a woman and how you approach life today?
Yeah, my grandmother influenced me a lot from just the food, she cooked, the herbs she brewed, to also just a way of life. She was not formally educated, just given that generation in the situation at the time. But she is a very curious person. She's actually quite entrepreneurial. So she would organize the community to do different things. She would service the community in many different ways. So in a way, she is a leader. She's a leader, just by nature, and she loves nourishing people. So every time that anyone visits, she would greet them with teas and food. So I really learned the philosophy of food as medicine from her. So growing up, she would brew these herbs and teas for me, and then they would be very soothing and calming. And I never really appreciated them at the time. But fast forward to kind of a very busy me having some gut health issues. I really went back to her herbal tonics and really played an important role in my life. So I would say that I learned a lot from her. For instance, this past holiday, I actually visited her and I was trying to get her to start in some Wild Wonder content because she has such a big influence on my life. And she was reluctant at first, but ended up really loving it. And we had photographers and videographers coming over to her house, and she ended up feeding everyone dumplings. And
Oh, I
that
love
was,
it.
obviously not what you typically do at a photo shoot. So that's just my grandmother. So she loves the idea of nourishing people with really good food and bringing communities together. So I think that's also part of our mission, is not just to bring heritage inspired and gut healthy ingredients to masses through Wild Wonder, but it's also to bring communities together, to really bring representation to retail shelves.
Yeah, and I love how you said she really taught you a way of life. Like, you don't realize all the beautiful things she's doing with food and the teas and the herbs until you're far removed. And we'll get into your story. But I love how also she was a leader. And even though she didn't have her own quote unquote business, there's so many skill sets that it seems like you've really taken from her to lead, take those risks, get people together, nourish people. So I always love to see that full circle moment. And let's fast forward a little bit. I know you ended up moving to the US at the age of 12. And in another interview, you actually mentioned having a culture shock was a complete understatement. So I would imagine that was a really pivotal time that really probably shifted your identity in some way. So can you kind of share more about that experience in your life?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say I didn't really have any expectations coming here from a completely different culture. I mean, I went from a very non-diverse place, being Beijing, China, to another non-diverse place in the opposite direction. So I went to Indiana, which is just a very, I mean, I think the minority percentage is very low for sure. It's not like San Francisco, which is where I live in. And you know, seeing people who look different, who speak differently, do things differently was is quite different for us. You know, it didn't feel like a shock necessarily because I wasn't really thinking, hey, this is, you know, kind of how my life is going to be. So I was very much focused on learning the language and figuring out the culture and participating, I guess, in the various activities that, you know, people were participating in. But I definitely felt disconnected. I didn't really feel included in a lot of the things that everyone else is doing. So I would say this is part of the reason representation matters to me. It's just making sure that everyone in the community feels included, and there are more familiar faces, there's more familiar stories out there, familiar food and beverage and ingredients that they can see a resemblance in. So that was, you know, it's quite different for me, but it was also a very formative experience, and it shaped the way I thought about a lot of things.
And I'm curious to dig into that a little bit. I know you moved here, like you said, with like no expectations. You didn't speak any English. I mean, you are landing in Indiana. Sorry, you said Indiana.
Indiana,
In
yeah.
Indiana. Wow. So, which is completely different. How do you think that shaped you? Did you, for example, like, did you feel like you had to prove yourself, or did you feel insecure as a child where you really leaned into your studies? Like, I'd be curious to kind of understand because you just, yeah, I'll pause right there, but I'd love to kind of understand that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I would say I was definitely trying to fit in. And I wasn't really thinking about it at the time, but there's this whole idea of fitting in, not necessarily standing out. And I think that's also very representative of Asian culture. And we were told to just, you know, put your head down, work hard, and prove yourself. So I was just trying to figure out what's going on around me. I mean, learning the language first was very hard because I basically started from scratch, but I was able to. I had it's actually hilarious because this tells you how not diverse Indiana was. They could not find an English as a second language teacher. So the only person they could match me with was this woman who's an ESL teacher who's Vietnamese, and obviously, like, I don't speak Vietnamese, she doesn't speak Chinese. But then they somehow thought that, hey, maybe we could connect more, which, you know, might not be untrue. But the language learning process was not easy. I actually enrolled myself in debate club as a way for me to learn.
Wow.
That part was probably the hardest thing I've done in, gosh, in like those years. Just being trying to understand what's going on and learning, and also just being able to formulate these arguments was not easy for sure, but that really forced me to learn the language and to become a better speaker. And so that was tremendously helpful in terms of language skills, public speaking skills, and I think that really built a foundation for me to be able to also command a presence and speak in larger groups growing later on in life, and also as a business leader.
It's so interesting how, you said growing up, and that probably resonates with so many people listening, even for me, like it was just so important to fit in and not stand out. And I feel like fast forward to our lives as an entrepreneur, you have to do the opposite of that. So I just love seeing how you started, and we'll kind of go into your journey, but you are on the other side of that right now. So I love the evolution. And, before we go into your story with Wild Wonder and your launch there, I'd love to actually talk about your career in finance. I know you actually worked in an interesting time during the financial crisis. So maybe you can kind of share maybe some of the learnings that you had there, and how did that really play into this personal health story of yours?
Definitely. I started in investment banking at Morgan Stanley at the start of the financial crisis, so 100% interesting time to start. Everyone thought that they were going to lose their jobs. But as the economy started picking up again, we started to see deal flow, and I ended up working in private equity and venture investing right after that. So essentially, as opposed to being in transaction services, advising, the PE firms or advising companies to go public, we would actually buy and sell companies. And that actually allowed me to really dig into businesses, understand the fundamentals of a business, and also to be able to scale businesses, which has been helpful for building my business. So during that time, it was very stressful, very busy. I was traveling a lot and ended up having some digestive issues, as we talked about before. And I remember going to the doctor's office this one time, and he said, "You're the first woman who over-reported her weight by 15 pounds." And I was like, "Why would I ever do that?" But because I was not sleeping well, I had digestive issues. I just lost weight, and I thought, hey, this is not really sustainable. Let me start to look into gut health and everything that's going on. So became a true believer after that. I didn't really think I was going to do anything about this. I thought I was going to continue to do investing. And when I went to Stanford Business School, I worked with a lot of startups on the side and essentially just worked alongside entrepreneurs, helped them launch and scale businesses, and found it really fascinating and really meaningful because instead of trying to make a return on a business that's already large and you're just essentially generating synergies and cutting costs, we get to build something really interesting. And so I thought after business school, I mean, Stanford really teaches people to change world and change organizations, and inspired a lot of entrepreneurs to launch their businesses. I mean, the CEO of DoorDash also went to Stanford, and he's a year above me. And he's actually, through Shark Tank experience, became an investor. So a lot of very inspiring people. So afterwards, I wanted to do something I'm personally passionate about, and which is to really bring these gut healthy ingredients and heritage inspired flavors to the masses. And it's also a way to honor my grandmother. And she did raise me up for 12 years and made a huge impact on my life. So that was really the start of my journey.
Yeah, and what's so interesting, and I love to highlight this for anyone listening, and like you were realizing your gut health issues, you were really leaning into food as medicine, but you didn't necessarily start your business right then. There was many years you went to business school, you mentioned you worked alongside startups, excuse me. So I just love to share that because sometimes I feel like people want that idea quick and want to start the business quick. And sometimes your life circumstances or what you're ready for doesn't allow for that. So I want to kind of go back a little bit to when you were in business school. I love this. And hopefully I got this correctly, but you were working alongside startups for free, I believe. Was that the case?
Yeah. I basically offer myself as free labor just to learn.
I love that. And I want to like triple down on this because I didn't end up going to business school, but when I was transitioning from finance to the startup world, I can't tell you how many people were like, which I disagree with still to this day as a startup owner now, but they're like, you don't have any transferable skills. Like you were working on massive transactions, like the companies weren't small and gritty, and they were true. But if you're curious enough, like your grandmother you were talking about, and smart enough, like anything is possible. So and I took massive pay cuts to work for startups too, just to learn. So I want to talk about what you did because I think it's such a good training ground for you eventually starting your business.
Yeah, definitely. I encourage everyone to try their hands at something that they think they want to do, because you might find out a lot of information that you didn't know before, right? For instance, like how does the food and beverage industry actually work? And I had no idea. And a lot of people were like, did you just like jump in right away? And yes, in a way I did, but I also, to your point, like learned a lot about startups and how startups worked by working with startups, because that's a completely different environment. So during business school and after, when I worked with those startups, and I actually realized that's the type of environment I can thrive in, and that's the type of culture I liked. I love the team camaraderie. I love the idea, the chaos, right? And then the chaos and the idea of taking something off the ground and just figuring things out. A lot of my friends didn't like that. So I had some friends that tried their hands at startups with me and ended up realizing that they wanted to go back to finance. So it's a really great way to test the waters by just getting an internship or like working on a side project, working at a startup just to get experience, a startup experience, or just experience to do a certain function. And I also just along that it's experience launching a product. We talked about not to be a perfectionist. So I would say having a side hustle is actually a great way to start a business and test out the product, launch something, and get feedback. And then when that seems to have traction, then you can always jump in.
Yeah, I love that. And there's something about, I say this, but I didn't do it myself, but there's something about doing it as a side hustle that kind of takes the pressure off a little bit. Like it's, you're able to test things like you said, and you're doing something else full time, but it's something that you're kind of playing around with on the side versus quitting your job and going all in. I mean, there's pros and cons to both, but I love the idea of testing things out on the side. And, one thing you also mentioned in another interview is, I believe it was after business school, you opened up about how you felt lost at the time. Maybe you can kind of share what were some of those feelings you were experiencing, because so many people might think, oh, I feel lost right now and I didn't even go to business school. So what was kind of going on in your mind, and how did you work through those feelings of being lost?
Yeah, I would say a lot of people go into business school thinking that they know exactly what they want. And but when I graduated, I had no idea what I wanted. And it was it was very unexpected. And it's not a comfortable feeling because throughout my life, I always had a plan. And that plan's definitely changed over time, but I always had a plan. And after business school, I had no idea which geography I wanted to be in. I didn't know which, I would say, what I wanted to do from a function or a category or market perspective. I thought I wanted to be in Asia at some point because Asia was growing so fast. And wouldn't it be great if I get to do something that's heritage inspired? And I thought I might want to be in New York and I might want to be in SF. So I did this whole, kind of finding myself journey. I traveled around the world. I would buy these one-way tickets. I'm not saying I encourage this, but this was just my way of exploring. I do think it was worth exploring whenever someone has these questions and ideas, because I had no additional information. I only worked in finance and investing. I only worked in the U.S. market. I had a short stint in China, which is why I thought, hey, maybe being Asia would be really interesting for me. But the only way I could really diligence that process or figure out what I wanted was to try my hands at different things. So I would take on these short-term projects, work on different ideas in different markets as a way for me to find out more about a specific idea, specific business, or specific geography. So I went to actually Thailand. I helped a friend launch a business in Thailand. And then I moved to Southeast Asia for a few months. And I basically just went from country to country to really explore. I also worked with a friend on a project in China and thinking that I might want to do something in the Chinese market. It was a very long and roundabout way of figuring out if those markets were something that I'm interested in. It's basically by process of elimination. I realized that I want to come back to the US market, but to still feel connected to heritage and bring something heritage inspired back to the US, and so that I can share that globally inspired flavors and ingredients with the world and also tell the story. And that's also another way to bring representation to the industry and to the entrepreneurial world. But it's also that was definitely a long and a rather painful journey because for someone who's always planned ahead and also thought I knew what I wanted, all of a sudden become like, oh, the world is your oyster, but at the same time, I had no direction and there's not really a track for me to follow. So I really thought hard about what is my calling, what's my passion. I really believe in the Japanese philosophy of ikigai, which is, you're the happiest when all these things are aligned, is what you find meaningful, what you're good at, and how, where can you be financially rewarded so that, you know, um, I can feel a purpose and a meaning in what I do, and I can feel really energized when I wake up in the morning.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I actually did not know that, that your story to that detail, because I know I could only imagine coming out of Stanford Business School, out of all business schools, most people have their life and their next steps set up. So the fact that you
Oh,
didn't already
100%.
is going against the grain, and you just doing one-way tickets, like that is very atypical for the standard business school graduate. So
Oh, definitely.
major props there. And I love actually what you said about it was a painful time, and it was kind of like process of elimination, because similar and different to you, when I wanted to leave finance and switch my career, I wanted to start a business, but I didn't have the idea. I also was jumping around. Like I first was jumping around to different functions in finance, but then I worked in startups and I was like, okay, this isn't working for me. Let's switch. And then ultimately it got me to, my own business. But I just want to highlight that, because I think even though we look back in that process, I'm sure for you was so painful. Like you said, it kind of pushed you to really think about what do you like? You know about
Yeah.
what you don't like, and you don't know that
Right.
until you experience it. And it actually is like the best thing in the world. And you get all this experience working in different teams that only helps you when you start your company. But so you end up landing in the US. You're really thinking about your ikigai, your purpose, what's going to get you excited, what's going to also be financially stable for yourself. Did you automatically start your first business at the time, Rosa Li Tea, or were you doing it on the side as you picked up another job here? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, I pretty much was full-time working on it, and I don't necessarily recommend that for everyone because it is truly a lot of financial pressure.
Yeah.
So if, for people who actually want to try something, if they can do it as side hustle, I think it's a smart idea. Not everyone will be in the same financial situation. Obviously, having worked in finance, that gave me some cushion to basically explore, take some time off. But I would say, as we all learned, cash is king. So maybe at a time, there's a lot more cushion. Once I started working on my business, I actually realized that it's so capital intensive, and unless you want to go out there and raise money, it takes a lot of cash to really build out that runway and test out products, hire people. So I would definitely try to be, if I were to do it again, I would be a little more financially savvy and conservative. So do as a side hustle. I jumped in right away. Probably similar to you. I basically said, hey, this is definitely something I want to explore. And I want to fully focus on it, which is also not the wrong way of doing it, but it's just a different way. And that allowed me to really focus and be completely in. So the benefits of that is I was 100% focused on one thing at a time, and I was able to just iterate as much as possible during that time. I wasn't distracted by other, work projects.
And what was the business at the time? Because we started this conversation about iteration. Your business was very different. So tell me what that business was and kind of how you eventually pivoted to what became, Wild Wonder.
Yeah, I started by so I grew up drinking a lot of teas and herbs. My Chinese grandmother inspired me, and I wanted to bring these artisanal teas from around the world, and they all have these great stories that people don't hear about. It's not the same as tea bags you buy in the grocery stores, and these are really whole leaf teas that you can brew multiple times, and they all have stories and really high quality. So I basically started doing a subscription business as similar to a coffee subscription. I thought, hey, maybe people want tea subscriptions, and it's really light to ship. E-com will be really easy to do, and I learned so much from that process because one, I realized that in the US we just don't have a tea culture. It's more of a coffee culture, so people would drink coffee very regularly but not tea, and it's also just inconvenient. We're all very busy. I mean, I'm pretty lazy myself. I wouldn't sit around and brew a cup of tea all the time. So I basically realized that people wanted convenience. And that's really the start of Wild Wonder, is to really, how do I bring all these benefits and delicious taste to people in a really convenient way, and introduce a product in a maybe it's even a more delicious way because for teas it's just there's a specific set of customers and that market is actually not that large. So learn a lot about supply chain as well, sourcing, operations. Learn a lot about how do I think about the customer, how do I think about acquisitions. So that was basically a whole years of learning experience.
One
And
year.
then,
You
yeah,
were doing the
that,
loose tea for 1 year fully.
yes, that's right. So then, before this, I had no operating experience. I didn't even know how to pack boxes. So I remember, I started with a Kickstarter, and that was kind of a shock to me because once I got all the orders, I had to ship them out. And I was just thinking, wow, I need to actually hire people to pack the boxes and essentially build like an assembly line to make the workflow really efficient. But that's the first time I even thought about operations. So very, very different from how financial investors would think about scaling or building a business. But it was like a lot of great learning experience thinking about how to hire people, hire teams, what are the different functions I need to hire for. And then just talking to customers. So this is when I started building relationships with all the very health conscious companies like a Meta or Google. I would serve tea in their cafeterias, and people will, really want to continue to consume tea. Actually, the inspiration for Wild Wonder also came from a conversation where a chef, I believe it was at Meta, either Meta or Google said, "Hey, like love your teas, but can you pre-brew everything and bring them in dispensers so that it's more convenient for everyone to enjoy them here?" And I was just thinking, well, that's not going to be scalable because I would have to purchase a lot of equipment and then somehow build a distribution network to deliver them and then somehow get them back to refill them. So that's basically how I started doing a ready to drink because there's already, existing infrastructure for manufacturing, for distribution, a lot more convenient to actually serve.
Yeah, and what's so interesting at the time, and I love that you brought that story, is that they had mentioned a ready-to-made drink would be easier, but like you said, you're like, I don't have the equipment. Like you did not even know how to create that at the time. Now this is your world, but you were just selling
Right.
loose leaf then. And tell me more about how maybe that first purchase order you got with that pre-made drink, because you didn't have everything set up. Like you were figuring it out once you got that purchase order. So tell me more about those early days, because I love how scrappy and real that time was.
Yeah, so this is right before COVID. I remember I somehow got connected with a chef at, I want to say it's one of the tech companies, Uber maybe, and they were inviting me to a sampling event. So what they did, and they still do that now, but COVID really like took a break on that, or they took a break from it during COVID. So the employees will actually vote on the products they want to stock in their office pantry,
That's nice.
right? And they're very spoiled. So, there will be Cliff Bar and some large beverage companies. I can't remember who all won at the time, but it's all the big brands that you would see at a grocery store. So they invited me to sample my products. I had no product at this time. So I just made the liquid at home in my kitchen, and I bought these swing top bottles from Amazon to really basically put a liquid in to serve from. And I made one bottle. I hand labeled one bottle just to make it look more real, like we actually have this product. So I went there with my cooler and all of the swing top bottles from Amazon, all the pre-brewed liquid, and one bottle. And they loved the taste. And the employees actually voted for me to bring my products in. And this is before I had a product, before we even had a co-man. So once I got the PO, once I got a purchase order, I was like, well, I can't make this in my kitchen because this is a very large volume. So I ended up exploring co-manufacturers I can partner with at the time. Found someone in North Bay, so I live in San Francisco. It's basically 3 hour drive up, and I realized that they could make bottled products that's sparkling at the time, and then we have a carbonated beverage. And so I basically made the liquid at home, had the owner taste it. He loved the product, but he would just not want to work with me because we're too small. We don't have a business. They want to work with people with a credit history, people with a history of selling the product so we can actually commit to a minimum. But I basically just cornered the guy. I would not leave until he gave me the answer I wanted, which is yes, I will work with you on producing this product. So he basically said, like, we'll line you up after, maybe when we produce someone else with the same bottle, because it will reduce the time that they switch lines and switch equipment, and it's also easier for them. So around the holidays one year, I actually don't know. So actually, this is before we launched. Yes, actually around the holidays. This is before COVID. He just called me. He said, "Hey, we only have this one day for you to produce it. Do you want to take this day?" And I was like, yes. I didn't even think. I just said yes. This is my one chance to produce it. And before the holidays, like shipping anything across the country is nearly impossible. There's delays everywhere. So I basically begged every single supplier to work with me to get my ingredients to this co-packer. And of course, I'm like the smallest brand they've never heard of. So to beg everyone to work with me, that part was also pretty challenging because why would anyone work with me in the first place, and why would they put my product before some of their larger customers? But in the end, it happened. So magically it happened, and our products were produced, and I had large POs going into these offices, and that was really the start of Wild Wonder. But then, COVID hit. So that was a whole other story. But there's a lot of challenges in the beginning.
I know. And I definitely want to talk about COVID and how that shifted your launch strategy. But before we go there, going back to, because I think this is so common when you're starting out, or even like when your business is larger, you're always trying to convince people, right? Especially in the early days, like you said, you tried so many different co-packers. You finally kind of cornered one and really begged him and turned his mind around to helping you guys. And like you said, even when you were during the holidays, we're trying to get your suppliers to work with you. Like, how do you think, maybe we can take your co-packer, for example, you really convinced him to change his mind? Because I think there could be people in that situation who just give up and they don't want to push. And they're like, you know what? This might be a sign that I can't move forward. So you have that grit and that stamina to get it across the finish line. Like any insights of maybe what you did or what motivated you? Because I think those moments are so crucial to get a business off the ground.
Yeah, definitely. And for any entrepreneurs, and I would say especially in the early days when you don't have traction, there's just so many opportunities for rejection. I think that's just a given. It's the default is you will be rejected. But for me, I would say persistence really worked. And when I truly believe in something and someone I talk to can see that on my face, in my action, they will get behind. And if they truly feel that, hey, this is someone who's passionate and this is a product that I can see, do well, or I like the taste of. So I think that's how they got behind me. And because I definitely did not have a business at that time. And I definitely would not be able to prove to be the most profitable or the largest customer. And I think just going back to the same co-packer, same supplier over and over again to just tell them the story, tell them why I'm doing this, and show them the product, they really got behind me. So, and I think they really saw how important it was for me, because I would not leave. I would not leave them alone. And maybe they were just annoyed and they wanted to get rid of me at the time, so they said yes. So, I mean, that's how I got everyone on board. And I would say there's so many people out there who told me no, and a lot of people said, why would you even do a beverage? And obviously before, I started in the beverage space, I didn't know how hard the beverage space is. It's very broy, it's owned by large conglomerates. It's very hard for small brands to really carve out a niche and build out shelf space. And operationally, it's also hard to, it's very capital intensive to do these large runs. And it's really capital intensive to ship liquid across the country. There's a lot of reasons to not do them. And I actually talked to a lot of industry experts, flavor houses who make drinks for other brands. They all said like, they basically all rejected me and actually said it's silly to even do this. So and I think this is when it's important to have a North Star, and it's not just about launching a product, and there is a mission behind the product. There's a story to tell, and that's what drove me in, during the very challenging times to really keep going. So I'm also just a very stubborn person. So I just kept asking the same questions. This is when people say every no gets you closer to a yes. And that either means like, it's a numbers game, you just need to get enough rejections to get a yes, or it means like maybe people will just give up on saying no, and they will get tired of saying no. They're going to feel bad saying no all the time. And they said yes.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm very similar. My husband's like, if you ever have a book one day, it's just like you always follow up. Like I don't let things drop. Like, especially like you said in the early days. And I actually love this. Expect the rejection because that's just the name of the game. Like you don't have a business at the time. You're trying to prove yourself. You're trying to story tell and convince people. Like I love that because maybe if you have that mindset of like, all right, this is going to be hard. I'm going to get a lot of rejections, but I'm going to just keep going, and the persistence and the follow up. And like you said, having that North Star is what's going to really go through those moments. And, to your point with beverage, I've heard from other friends in the industry, people who've started business, who've left the business, who are successful in the business. Like I've seen it all. And, beverage is a very quote unquote difficult industry to break. So I can only imagine, and how male dominated it is. I've heard that from quite a bit of people. So I could imagine you just getting even more rejections than, maybe like the average person creating a product in their kitchen, for example. So I love just kind of everything that you did and the persistence that you had. And now let's go to the launch strategy. So you think you finally got the bottles, everything is good. You have this idea of how you're going to launch, and COVID happens and shifts everything. So tell me more about how you shifted your what you wanted for your launch strategy, and then how you shifted your launch strategy.
Yeah, definitely. So we had this vision, or I had this vision of launching the brand into food service, and I call food service meaning, airports, cafes, offices. So I already built relationships with these really health conscious large tech companies who are at the forefront of bringing healthy food to people. So Google's, Meta offices, LinkedIn, it's, anyone that you probably ever heard of being in the Bay Area. We had large POs going out, and I actually specifically stayed away from e-commerce and retail. Both of those channels are quite expensive. So retail is very expensive to launch in. You have to pay for shelf space. You have to support every single store. That takes team, that takes money. And every store doesn't generate that much revenue. So you have to basically go out to a bunch of stores. It's a volumes game. So in order to actually produce a large volume, and agree to work with a co-packer, we have to have larger customers. And there's one of me, so, no team. And I was just thinking, okay, what's the highest leverage for my time? Is to really sell into the offices so that one sale will get me the volume. So, had connections to these office spaces, had POs, and then all of a sudden COVID hit. So they all canceled the POs because the offices shut down. And there's no cafes for people to go into. There's no, I guess some people were flying, but very rarely. So the entire channel strategy just failed right out the gate. And
you have all
I was
this
just
product.
thinking, yeah, I produce all the products. Some people, some distributors weren't even paying us because they were also out of cash. So it was just it's a terrible time to start. But it was also, in a way, a very illuminating experience for me, because it really helped me to rethink the strategy, the distribution strategy, the supply chain strategy. Supply chain completely broke down because we just couldn't get supplies from abroad. People couldn't even get cans. All the co-packers shut down because, I mean, if someone had COVID, they're not going to produce products for people when it comes to food and beverage. So there's no way to even produce the product, let alone my entire distribution channel was shut down. So I was actually thinking at the time, well, instead of selling to Google, I could just get a job at Google. So, but this is when, back to the North Star comment, there is a mission, there is a story, and it's not just about selling the product. So I really believed in what we're doing, in the product itself, in the brand. So I wanted to not give up so easily. And I said, hey, let me just sell these products to the stores. The stores were the only places that were open at the time. So everyone was at the grocery stores. And so instead of quarantining at home while everyone else is quarantining at home, I basically packed my car with Wild Wonder drinks. And at this time, there were glass bottles. So I went door to door. I went down, I basically went up and down the street, went to every single store in San Francisco, and just pitched my product to the store managers. And obviously, the store managers were also really stressed out. They were so busy stocking shelves. A lot of products were out of stock. So I was even helping them stock the shelves and make friends, became friends with them so that they know that I'm there to help. At the same time, I have a story to tell. So basically, by the end of year one, so this is 2020, we ended up being in 100 stores, and including our local Whole Foods. And
And that was all
the
done by you. Like you were
yes,
hustling,
I
going to
was
these
I
stores.
was the
Yeah.
the single salesperson at the
Amazing.
company, and at the same time, we also got our website up and running. So e-commerce was one of the few places people were buying things, and I channeled essentially our customers from food service offices and to our e-commerce channel, essentially to service the same customers at home instead of getting the drinks to their offices, just as a way to make cash flow work. I mean, it's not sustainable to ship individual cases of drinks in glass bottles to people at home, but we wanted the revenue, and we were able to essentially generate more cash flow from that. At the same time, diversified the distribution strategy, went into retail. And so this whole experience actually allowed us to diversify the business from both a distribution channel perspective as well as a supply chain perspective.
Oh, stressful, but I'm sure it's like years of what you were maybe going to do done in like a year because you
Oh,
had no
yeah,
choice.
right. Yeah, yeah,
So it's
yeah.
the most beautiful thing. And I believe I'm going to maybe not even fast forward because I think was it maybe the following year you were on Shark Tank?
So we aired on Shark Tank January 2023. So basically during COVID, Shark Tank actually reached out to us, and they somehow found out about Wild Wonder. They wanted to interview me and to film for the show. And this is when supply chain was still broken. And I actually said no for the first year because I knew that in order to even have a business or even do the marketing and have that opportunity to scale, we need to have the right infrastructure for shipping, for making the products, for, everything. So I decided to just delay it. And then the following year, which is 2022, I reached back out and said yes. So we went through the entire Shark Tank process, and taped towards the end of 2022, and then aired in early 2023, which was one of those pivotal moments for the history of Wild Wonder. Really changed. It really catapulted us to a different stage, and brought so much brand awareness and product trial. And so that, I mean, I would say that's, if I were to name, top three things I've done for the business that is completely life changing, that's one of them.
Wow, I have so many. Well, I have a few more questions on about Shark Tank, but what would you say would be the other life-changing things, like pivotal things in the business that might come to mind?
Totally. And I would say one is the packaging change. So we converted from glass bottles to cans. This is very early on. So in the first year, we were in glass bottles, learned a lot from that. The consumer experience is completely different. Consumer perception is different in what the product is and how they how they could consume the product. And distribution channels were also different because there's By converting to cans, it really opened up distribution for us. We can then, scale on e-commerce. We can scale in food service in places that don't allow glass bottles because it's risky. So that really changed the game. And then to the everyday consumer, they actually told us, hey, they feel wasteful drinking multiple bottles a day. So the way you drink a kombucha is you kind of nurse it over time, and it's also very vinegary, so people can't chug a whole bottle at a time. So once we converted to cans, it's actually a lot more accessible, it's more approachable, and so people could actually drink multiple cans, in the same day, and that really increased the frequency of consumption.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Interesting. So going back to Shark Tank, I know smart to kind of put it off for a year. I can't imagine you being on there and blowing up when you don't have like the right infrastructure in place. So good call on that. And I know you didn't do any marketing, I believe, before Shark Tank, right? So what shifted in your mind? Were you like, all right, I'm ready to do this? Because I've had many women on the podcast also go on Shark Tank, and I know it's not the easiest thing per se. You are basically prepping like it's your life on the
It's a
line,
full-time
right?
job.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
full-time
what I've
job.
heard. Yeah. So give me more of like the thought process. I know you weren't doing marketing, and then like tell me more about the prepping and everything, because you're right, it is a full-time job, but it seems like it was
There's
worth
so
it.
much. Oh, 100%. It's so much work. I was on calls with them once a week to once every 2 weeks. And it's about building the booth. You have to build the entire set on stage, and that is resources, that I have to basically expense. And it's my time, obviously. And then there's a lot of storytelling. And the 2 weekends before Shark Tank, when the 2 weekends before my taping date, I binged through every single food and beverage episode on Shark Tank. And because I wanted to see, what questions they ask, how do people respond to food and beverage. I didn't actually watch Shark Tank myself. So I knew that the show is really popular. It's got 4 million viewerships across the country. But, having not watched it, I was not feeling confident. But once I watched everything, I thought to myself, well, I know how to answer all these questions. Obviously, I'm, day in, day out. I mean, I'm always in the numbers. I know exactly why I'm doing this. And I wanted to share that story with the world, and why we're different, why we're doing this. And obviously, when we taped, and it's truly like reality TV, you don't really get to retape. Is you say whatever you say, they will capture, and they get to edit it however they want. So
I've
I
heard.
was I was in the tank for about 90 minutes, and they cut it down to 8 minutes of airtime. And so I had no idea actually what they took from those 90 minutes of conversation. And when it aired, so when everyone watched it, was the first time I watched it. And it was very nerve-wracking because I had no idea how they're going to tell the story, because they can literally, I mean, they're the MVPs, right, in editing. So they can literally make you look like a hero or a villain or someone who just made a ton of really silly decisions. But they all love the story. They got behind the product. They actually love the taste of the product, which was truly my goal, is to get all the sharks to love the product. Mark Cuban loved the strawberry passion so much. He chugged a whole can of strawberry passion on TV. We got sold out on Amazon in 2 hours after that. So that was, definitely an exciting experience.
Oh my God, I can't even imagine. You're right. It's really, it blows my mind that they can take 90 minutes and put it into 8 minutes. Like I can't, like with podcasting, if we do a 2 hour podcast, maybe I can
Yeah.
do it in an hour. I mean, that
Yeah.
is wild. And I've had people on the podcast say like, I heard from other people on Shark Tank, like I tried not to do facial expressions because they can take that cut and put it on something else. So it's just interesting. Yeah. Like I've heard people say like, they'll take it, just to make it very engaging. I'm like,
Totally. I
man,
mean, they definitely reordered some things because I was like, did I say that at the beginning or at the end? So they're great storytellers.
oh my gosh, very, very impressive. Well, I know we're coming in on time, and I love your story. I love how scrappy it is. Maybe we can kind of end on a question I love to ask. And a lot of this we've kind of highlighted and talked about throughout the podcast. But what do you think most people get wrong when it comes to launching or starting a business that we may not have touched on yet in this podcast?
It's really interesting because there's so many things that could go wrong. I know it's been a very, there's been a theme of focusing on building profitable businesses. Given where the market went, there's just not as much consumer or there's just not as much investor dollars out there, especially in food and beverage, especially for women entrepreneurs. I think it's been tough all along to get funding. So even from the start, I decided to really focus on profitability and to build a sustainable brand. So not rely so heavily on outside funding. Obviously, it's not easy. It's not easy to build any business with that's really capital intensive. But I would say to really focus on the profit and loss financial model. Think about margins, think about every dollar in, every dollar out. And I think having some financial knowledge is actually quite key. I'm lucky to have that background and I know how to think about the different financial levers we can pull in order to have more cash flow in the door. But that's something that everyone can learn. And I know I looked at a lot of businesses that just run very risky models and they're burning so much cash and it's just so hard to operate based on market conditions. So I would say think hard about margins, think hard about how to make the business profitable, in the early stages, just so that when the market turns south, if some external event like COVID happens, we just don't go straight to bankruptcy.
Oh, I love that. I feel like we can do a whole podcast on that. I'm super passionate about that. I love that you bring that up and that's something that, you should think about in the early days of launching as you're thinking about your margins, how much to sell things for, how much things cost, like really knowing every dollar in and out. Because I know sometimes finance can be intimidating for people who might not have spent time in this space, but I think, whether it's bringing someone on board to support you and just really understanding money in and money out, it's not as difficult, especially when you're very small. So I
Yeah.
love that concept. But oh my God, Rosa, this was so much fun. I could talk to you forever. Love what you guys are doing. Can't wait to continue to watch. And by the way, big congrats. I believe you guys just got into Whole Foods
Whole Foods
nationally, right?
nationally. Yes, yes.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. So appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. That was so much fun.